Welcome everyone to the 2021 New Orleans Poetry Festival. I'm Bill Lavender from the NOPF board. I'm going to start out by thanking our sponsors for this year, especially the Jazz and Heritage Foundation in New Orleans and the Academy of American Poets, which helped us keep this year's fest free and open to all. Glad to see you with us at this event, and I hope to see you at many others as we're hosting throughout the month of April. There's something going on every day. Just go to nolapoetry.com and click on the Zoom link and you're in. So I'm wearing a couple of different hats today. One is the festival moderator, but I'm also the event moderator, so I have to do a couple of things at the same time, which is challenging for me, apparently. So we're here today to talk about North African literature and sort of especially the couple of new books that we just put out at Diálogos. We have the translators of these books with us, and also Habib Tengour. I think I'm just going to start out by reading the bios of the four participants, or the four panelists. You're all participants. The first one I'm going to introduce is Peter Thompson. He's the translator of Discovery of the New World by the trilogy of novels by Nabil Fares that we're going to be talking about a little later, and he'll be reading from it. He's a professor of modern languages and literature at Roger Williams University. He's edited 2 widely used anthologies of Francophone literature, and he edits Ezra, an online journal of translation at ezratranslation.com. He has his own poetry books include Late Liveries, Shades, Angle of Incidents. Novels include Winterlight and Harrison's Word. His many works of translation include Khatibi's Tattooed Memory, Asus, Gates of the Sun, Veronique Tajot's Red Earth, Leon Paul Fargue's Poems, and Abdelkader Jamai's Father Son, and of course the Fares trilogy that we're going to be talking about today. Jake Syersak is poet, translator, and editor living in Seattle, Washington. He's the author of the recent poetry chapbook Vortex, From Coast No Coast, and the full-length poetry collection Yield Architecture from Burnside Review Press. In 2021, his new full-length poetry collection, Mantic Compost, will come out from Trembling Pillow. He's the translator of several collections of poetry by Moroccan author Mohammed Khaïr-Eddine, including Proximal Morocco, which Ugly Duckling Press is putting out in 2023, and Resurrection of Wildflowers from Oomph coming in 2021. With Pierre Joris, he co-translated Khaïr-Eddine's hybrid novel, Agadir, which Diálogos put out in 2020. Pierre Joris needs no introduction. He's published more than 50 books of poetry, essays, translations, and anthologies, including most recently Breath Turned into Timestead, the collected later poetry of Paul Celan, and more recently, the 2 final volumes of the Celan translations, Microliths and the collected earlier poetry, as well as the volume of essays, Arabia Not So Deserta from Spuyten Duyvil, and a Pierre Joris reader from BWP in 2020. He is co-editor with Habib Tengour of the University of California Book of North African Literature, Volume 4 in the Poems from the Millennium series. While not on the road, he lives in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn with his wife, multimedia artist Nicole Perrafit. Habib Tengour is a French-Algerian poet, sociologist, and anthropologist. He's the author of more than 20 books of poetry and fiction in French, with English translations available of Crossings, translated by Marilyn Hacker from Post Apollo in 2013, and Exile is My Trade, a Habib Tengour reader, edited and translated with an intro by Pierre Joris from Black Widow in 2011. Also, Empedocles Sandal, also translated by Pierre Joris, which I think he's going to be reading from today. And he, as mentioned when I was talking about Pierre, he's also the co-editor of the University of California Book of North African Literature. Habib also translates poetry and prose from English and from Arabic into French. Okay, so this field of North African literature is one that I first got into, and I'm speaking now as the editor at Lavender Ink and Diálogos Press, not as the New Orleans Poetry Festival MC. But years ago, Peter Thompson first introduced me to Nabil Fares and this really exciting field of North African literature, which had something that I had been looking for a long time. I think its particular angle of poetical slash political interventions were something that really appealed to me. And as I've gotten into it, I've only found it getting more and more interesting. And so I'm really excited with the publication of these two particular works, Agadir and The Discovery of the New World. I feel like these are very important works that have not been translated until now, and very happy to be able to be putting them out in English. And so I believe we're going to start by talking about Agadir. And Pierre, were you going to start, or how are we going to do it? Pierre, unmute yourself.
I said Habib is going to read a couple pages in French and Jake the English, and I can say a couple words about the man.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, now I'm going to try to do, because it's a multilingual thing and a lot of people won't be completely fluent, I was going to try to do screen shares. So just let me see if I can pull that off. Oh. Okay, I'm getting close. I'm really sorry. You see that?
Yeah, great.
Are you seeing some French text?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So this is the French of Agadir. Okay.
Vas-y, Habib. Is Habib maybe silenced?
He's not unmuting himself.
Recommence. No, you got muted again. Attends.
Là, tu m'entends?
Oui, on t'entend, vas-y.
Ah, because it was, oui, oui. OK. It's OK?
Yes.
Yes.
C'est le matin.
Good.
C'est le matin, enrobant les derniers toits de ma ville natale. Tout à fait devant soi, l'horizon moite, percé de rayons aigus. Mon compagnon de voyage est content de pouvoir enfin retourner chez lui. Je dirais même qu'il exulte secrètement. Il me décrit son ancienne villa perchée comme un nid de cigogne sur la pointe de la Casbah, que, dit-il, envahit le vent rapide des hauteurs, un vent calme et pur qui n'a rien à voir avec le vent poussiéreux d'en bas de la route, sale et des docks. Sa villa est tombée en même temps que la ville. Il perdit sa femme et ses 2 fillettes. Mais il ne regrette pas ce mauvais coup du sort, ayant voulu jadis répudier son épouse et confier ses enfants à quelque organisme de bienfaisance. Au contraire, il est tout heureux, puisque je ne suis pas mort, que m'importe la vie des autres. Non, ça ne vaut pas cher, ça ne vaut pas mon paix. L'autocar traîne sa carcasse poussive et, eh bien, on arrivera. On reverra au moins un éboulis de chez moi. Sois tranquille. Un ami qui a survécu comme moi à cette nuit terrible m'a envoyé à la caserne une photo, le représentant debout contre la porte éclatée de ma demeure. C'est pathétique. Moi aussi, j'aime me faire photographier comme ça devant chez moi, mais jamais à l'intérieur. Quand je me regarde sur le papier ou dans le souvenir, j'aime me sentir libre, en sécurité, hors du béton armé dans l'air. On reverra, c'est surtout de lui qu'il s'agit. Je reverrai ce qui fut ma maison. D'ailleurs, je n'y crois pas beaucoup. Je connais les militaires et les villas n'existent pas sur les Casbahs. Quant à moi, cette ville où mon nouveau patron m'envoie en vue de redresser une situation particulièrement précaire, je ne la connais pas bien. Oui, j'y suis passé. J'y ai même passé une nuit pendant les vacances et j'ai lu le journal qui relatait la catastrophe. Il semblait que les rats y fissent un régiment dévoreur de charognes, des clichés que j'ai consultés. Il ne me reste plus en mémoire que des gravats jetés les uns sur les autres et ce grondement ressenti au moment où je faisais ma valise. Non, vraiment, je n'ai rien appris de rassurant sur cette ville. On m'a tout simplement dit au bureau directorial, le commandant a été évincé. À vous de mener à bien cette affaire. Elle peut durer longtemps si vous ne vous y mettez pas complètement. On m'a ensuite remis un chèque au porteur et puis je n'ai pas l'intention d'en dire plus long sur cette ville. You read the English part or I continue?
Let's
Let's
go to
I
the
think
English.
the best is to read the English now.
The English?
Yes.
Okay.
Huh?
It's morning, wrapping over the last roofs of my native city. In front of us, the humidity of the horizon shot through by the sharpened rays of sunlight. My traveling companion is relieved to have finally been able to make it back to his house. I might even say that he's secretly rejoicing. He describes his former villa perched like a stork's nest from the highest point of the Casbah. He claims overcomes the lofty swiftness of the wind, a calm and pure wind that has nothing to do with the dusty wind down along the dirty street and docks below his villa collapsed the same moment as the city He lost his wife and 2 little girls, but he doesn't regret this unfortunate twist of fate, having previously yearned to get rid of his spouse and to entrust his children to a charitable organization of some sort. On the contrary, he's perfectly happy seeing as I'm not dead. What does it matter to me, the life of others? No, that's not worth a whole lot. That's not worth jack shit. The bus pulls its broken down carcass around. Well, anyways, we're on our way. At least we'll get to see what's left of my house. Don't worry. A friend who survived along with me that terrible night mailed a photo to the station showing him leaning up against the smashed in doorway of my house. It's pathetic. I'm the same way. I love taking photographs of myself like that out in front of my house, but never from the inside. Whenever I view myself on paper or from the inside of memory, I love the feeling of being free, secure, outside of the fortified concrete in the open air again. We'll look into it again. He's the one this is all about. I'll get to see what became of my house, though I don't have a whole lot of faith knowing the military and the villas are non-operational within the Kasbahs. As for me, this city my new boss sends me to, in order to sort out a particularly precarious situation I wasn't aware of. Well, sure, I had passed through. I even spent a night there during the holidays. And I read the newspaper that told of the catastrophe. It seems the rats formed a regiment of corpse devourers. Of the snapshots I consulted, all that remains in memory are broken stones piled on top of each other, and this rumbling roar felt at the moment I packed my bag. No, really, I haven't learned anything reassuring about this city. I was simply told in the director's office, the commander has been ousted. It's up to you to bring this matter to a conclusion. It may take a long time if you don't engage it head on, after which I was handed a check made out to the bearer, and beyond that, I don't have any intention of saying anything more about this city.
I read the second part. The next text, yeah. La ville. Non, 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 encore.
No. Here?
No, encore. 121. More, ouais. Here, here. 121. Yeah, here. La ville choix, gouttes d'huile veinées, rouge, blanc, sur les plis du sol embués, route saccadée vers le creux de la plage où la même vague et le perpétuel assaut de l'écume hissent la nuit des poteaux télégraphiques, les bassins d'eau sale, pas vidés depuis une semaine, mes jambes, pieds hors du sillage, fondant la mince étoffe bleue, salée, blanche, sans doute n'avais-je rien vu, songeant à la noyade d'hier, à la rade aux ambulances hurlant, comme un ordre, les moules crépités sous les gros souliers des pompiers, la première gifle du flot fracassée contre moi endolorie, mais j'étais maître de mes gestes, nageant vaillamment, arraché à la grille dont je ne savais même pas qu'on l'avait fixée au-delà du sable pour empêcher les baigneurs d'aller trop loin dans la mer me noyant. Et sur la pointe, par-dessus mon cri suffoqué, la ville qui tourne le boulevard, qui, au lieu d'aller droit devant, fait une boucle, laissant une certaine place au parking, aux cabanons et aux marchands de la saison. Et cette forme humaine, sombre, qui s'agitait comme au centre d'un théâtre pierreux, s'égouttant toujours derrière le petit mur de ciment et de coquillages, m'appelant, elle pensait peut-être que je m'amusais. Tout à coup, je vis du sang, ma lèvre fondue, les piqûres du sel se répandant dans ma chair en une sorte de grésillement inaudible. La ville au loin, de plus en plus haute, inaccessible, tel un bâtiment uniforme et confus, tassé sur elle-même, soudain ranimée. Je bondis et je m'excusai. La route bifurquait juste au moment où je remarquai, pour la énième fois, le bois de pin, les broussailles et les à peine visibles baraquements des chiffonniers formant derrière l'apaisant brouillard de l'après-midi autant de huttes sans toit. Mais je n'ai pas encore saisi pourquoi je cherche et ne trouve jamais ma ville. It's here. It's up here. Okay.
So now we're going to page 115.
Sorry to be a klutz with this. Wait, there it is.
Oops, you're way over.
Got it.
There we are.
In italic here.
I have no idea what that is. So.
The city oozes a red and white veined oil drop onto the misty terrain's folds, roads in fits and starts toward the beach's cavity. The same wave and the perpetual assault of froth hoists the night's poles, the pools of filthy water gone unemptied for a week. My legs, feet outside the wake, breaking the measly, bleachy, blue, salty stuff. Without a doubt, had I seen nothing? Dreaming of yesterday's drowning in the harbor with ambulances screaming by on command, the muscles crushed under the wide boots of the firefighters. The first slap of the tide's crash against my body was aching, but I was master of my own movement, swimming valiantly, clinging to the grate, which I hadn't even realized someone affixed beyond the sand to prevent the swimmers from wandering too far out into the water I was drowning in. And on the cusp above my stifled cry, the city that revolves around the boulevard that instead of going straight ahead, makes a loop, allowing some room for parking, for cabins, for seasonal merchants. And this shadowy human form that was writhing like it was the centrifuge of a gravelly theater, draining without end over the opposite side of the lower wall of cement and seashells, calling out to me. She thought perhaps that I was having fun. All of a sudden I saw blood, my split lip, the stings of salt coursing through my skin in a sort of inaudible static, the city further away in the dark, in the distance, higher and higher, inaccessible, like a uniformly confused building collapsing into itself, suddenly reanimated. I leapt up and excused myself. The path was forking off just as I was noticing for the umpteenth time the pine woods, the undergrowth, and the barely visible rag and bone men's shacks lining up behind the soothing fog of the afternoon, a number of roofless huts, but I haven't yet grasped why I'm still seeking, but never find my city.
Okay, great. Maybe we should drop back now and just Jake, either you or Pierre, give us a little background on this novel and on Khaïr-Eddine.
Well, the novel came out from Le Seuil in Paris in 1967, and it relates the earthquake that destroyed Agadir, the city on the Atlantic coast of Morocco, some years earlier. And what is fascinating with the book, we have read the prose passages we've seen have no punctuation. The book is way more experimental than one would have expected in any sense. Khaïr-Eddine really started out as a poet. And by that time, he had published one little book called Nausées Noires of poems, which had, by the way, been published in England by a French poet who happened to live there. And what struck me when I got the book first was that it was my roommate, Mohammed Khaïr-Eddine. We shared a room at Shakespeare and Company in Paris in early '67. I was reading Pound, And here was Khaïr-Eddine, and I realized that I had made the right decision to write in English rather than in French, because the French that I could have written, I was bored with the French writers, but via him I discovered how amazing the Maghrebi writers of that moment were. You know, he gave me the other important people to read at that time, Kateb Yassin's Nejma, and the early work by his friend from the Revue Souffle, or his friends from there. And what blew me away even then, and has done it ever since, is the experimental side of him and a range of other Maghrebi writers with whom I have, in that sense, stayed close to, as to my mind, writing the most interesting writing in French. All the interesting writing in French came either from North Africa or from the Caribbean. I will get bad press for that, but you know, and core to that is, you know,
That is true.
Khaïr-Eddine as really one of the amazing poets.
Yes, Pierre, I think that Khaïr-Eddine was considered as Kateb Yassin for Morocco, the Kateb Yassin of Morocco. When this book was published, it was really a shock for the readers because, yeah, he revealed the way of writing, the writing way of Kateb Yassin. And it's a poetic, yeah, what said Pierre, that the book is an experimental, but not experiment for experience, but it was also, how to say, contest, how you say, contestation? Contesté.
Yeah, he was contesting, he was
contesting the Moroccan system by the way of writing.
the political system, the whole culture.
Yeah,
Structure, yeah. And he was in exile in Paris then, and he didn't go back for many years. And when he got back, he was thrown in jail. I was sitting in Algeria and reading the Mujahid, seeing that he was in jail, and we all sent in letters to get him released and so on. He was quite, you know, quite an amazing writer and human being.
Was
Jay,
also,
you a sense of what, because you've been very involved with him now too.
Yeah, I was going to say that I just wanted to, you know, kind of reiterate your experience with French literature was very much like mine. I mean, I came across Khaïr-Eddine when I was in doing my PhD and looking for a translation project, and I kept looking at French poetry from France, and I went through a lot of it, and I was just bored, book after book. Not that it was bad, but it was kind of the same old thing over and over again. So I found your anthology of North African literature, and Mohammed Khaïr-Eddine just struck me immediately. And here was work that was written, you know, 50 years prior. I mean, more than that now. Yeah, even longer than that. And it seemed to me to be so modern, so ahead of even the times now in terms of some American poetry. So I was taken by it immediately. So, and in terms of speaking towards Agadir in particular, Agadir was, it struck me immediately as so, not only for its experimentalism, but also for how comprehensive and interconnected everything works in the novel. For example, there is this, you know, more or less in a natural disaster, which destroys this city. And it's not only that he documents the pain and the struggles of the people affected by this, but he also dredges up cultural relations, socio-political relations that this disaster had an effect on, or dredged up, or brought back from memory. And he brings back ancestors and looks towards the future even. So he's looking towards the past, he's looking towards the future, he's looking at all these things. And I read this book very much in conversation with our modern day, the constant threat hanging over our heads of ecological disaster and climate change. And for me, it has a lot of really interesting kind of rhizomes that ease into that modern conversation of just how one ecological disaster has so many different facets. And I think it's fascinating in the contemporary scene for that reason, if you want to give it that kind of reading. So he lives into today in so many interesting ways.
Absolutely.
Okay, do we want to move on to Habib's poem? Or I'll set the agenda. Maybe Pierre, if you want to introduce the poem, since you translated it. And
Okay, quickly. When Habib gave me a copy of Empedocles' Sandal, it was immediately, to me, a singularly amazing poem. And I decided to translate it because I was also already working on a book of Habib's. Habib and I go back to the 70s. We both taught 76 to 79 at the University of Constantine in Algeria. So we're old friends from those days. And so I wasn't very surprised of this poem from Habib that starts, in fact, with a quote in German from Hölderlin, from the death of Empedocles and so on. And I started translating it, and I thought of it as, wow, here is an amazingly very contemporary modern poem. So let me read it, and I'll say something else about that once we have read it. Shall I start it, or tu veux commencer toi, Habib? Tu veux lire la première page?
If you want, yeah, I can. But I have just to say that this poem is the first version of the poem.
Okay, yeah.
I have a second version, was published in maybe the end of or the beginning of 2001, maybe 2001, 2002, 20, and it was published in Italian, bilingual, Italian and French. And the last version is going to be published now in June in French. I wrote it when I was in Berlin, my last version. And the text, the difference between the first and the last version is how to cut the verse, how to introduce some reflection about the city of Berlin and something like this. So I read the first.
We're being bombed, I think.
yeah, hold on.
The text is, you have in the text 10 poems, the 10 mu'allaqat, where each part is reference about a reference of one mu'allaqa. The mu'allaqat are the famous poems in the old Arabian poems, anti-Islamic poems. So I'm reading the first. Arrêt. Arrêt. Une pause de courte durée. L'espace clos. Souvenance obligée. Larmes. Elles ne sont pas nécessaires. Le dictionnaire tempère la banalité du stéréotype. Une nostalgie se profile dans la description du lieu. Comme un exil circonscrit, comme se trouble l'œil après la jonction. Handicap du code, des noms insolites à la tombée du jour, malgré la profondeur de l'évocation. Les
Wow.
usages se confondent sur l'asphalte. La trace vainement cherchée,
Unbelievable.
là, effacée, elle est visible au cœur tisserand. Les temps ne changent pas si vite leur durée, ni l'étreinte qui succède où se déchiffre une âme. Prolifération de signes, mais la voix haute, celle qui délie les langues et courbe le discours. Hélas, que d'embûches mortelles en chemin. Les anges refusent de nous accompagner, les lumières clignotent par ostentation, les harangues nous éloignent du campement. Voici le moment. S'introduire par effraction, j'entre, mon propos pour ouvrir la porte, dire sous la dictée d'une effusion contenue. Aligner un texte sans histoire. Un temps, goûter à la halte des vestiges, relever la splendeur de l'éclat, sans céder au subterfuge de la lettre. Paris, novembre, rue Saint-Antoine, Constantine, cité du 20 août, janvier, Paris à nouveau, examiner chacune des adresses, un brin d'éclaircie fouette les nuages.
Stop. A pause of short duration. The closed space, compelled remembrances, tears, they are not necessary. The dictionary tempers the banality of the stereotype. A nostalgia emerges in the description of the place, like a circumscribed exile, like the eye dimming after the junction. Handicap of the code, unusual names at nightfall, despite the invocation's depth. The usages intermingle on the asphalt, the trace vainly sought there, effaced. It is visible. O heart, you weaver, the times don't change that fast, their duration, nor the embrace that follows, where a soul deciphers itself, a proliferation of signs, but the loud voice, the one that unites the tongues and curbs the discourse. Alas, so many lethal traps on the way. The angels refuse to accompany us. The lights blink ostentatiously. The harangues lead us far from the encampment. This is the moment to enter surreptitiously. I go in, my purpose, my utterance to open the door, to say under the dictation of a continuous effusion, to align a text without history, for a moment to enjoy the stopping, to reveal the splendor and brilliance of the vestiges without giving in to the letter subterfuge. Paris, November, rue Saint-Antoine, Constantine, cité du 20 août, Paris again. Examine each of these addresses. A small light rift whips the cloud. So I want to say just something in terms of the discovery of that poem. As I began translating it, I thought of it as nearly Mallarméan, a classical poem, you know, with the discontinuous verse and so on, until all of a sudden I got stopped by the first word, stop. And all of a sudden I said, hey, that's how all the old pre-Islamic odes start. They have an introduction where the poet stops at the old campfire. And that puts him in mind of things. And so I realized that underneath or together with the very modernist or postmodernist, however you want to say, you know, post-Mallarméan poem, there was also the structure in it of the most classical of Arabic poems, you know, so that amazed me and was a great pleasure to discover. Anyway, it's been a treat translating Habib's work for many years. Giving it back to Bill.
Ouais.
Yeah, let me just say that I feel like an octopus here. I'm kicking out so many Zoom bombers that it's quite insane. So they are even to the point of mimicking real names. And so it would be handy for me if those of you who are real would just put a little note in the chat saying I'm real. Also, any of you who are co-hosts and have admit ability, don't admit anybody, just let me do all the admitting. Because I've kicked out about a dozen so far and missed several. Yeah.
I admitted one person, that was Peter Gizzi. I think he's real.
I don't think he is actually. I think I mean Peter was in there twice, so I think somebody adopted Peter's name.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think so. There's Peter is saying what in the chat, and as I can understand, yeah. Okay. Now, Peter, I know you're real, but you were in there twice. So I think someone had, I think a Zoom bomber had co-opted your identity. Or I think you're real anyway. Yeah. I'm not totally certain. Okay, well, thank you for that. And I'm sorry about the Zoom bomber situation that was so distracting, especially for me. But I hope we got through it all right. And I didn't realize that they could co-opt the screen share and write obscenities on it, which I guess is what happened to you at the Princeton event, eh?
Yes, but they were not as good as you. They were never able to deal with it, so we had to.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Drop it.
Well, if this happens again on the screen share, I'm just going to turn it off and we'll just have to do without it, which would be kind of a shame because they really, especially, no, the Far East is coming up. I think it's kind of, it's important to see the sort of the nature of this prose text, that it's not like normal prose, you know. So Peter Thompson, I guess we're going to turn it over to you. How do you want to do this? Do you want to kind of introduce the Far East text and read from it, or vice versa?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple words about it and then read 3 short bits from it. This is the book, by the way. It doesn't show that well. It's a Diálogos book, of course. And it follows at least 3 other Diálogos Fares titles, Nabil Fares. We started working with him 10 years ago. And I say with him, I always worked with Nabil Fares while he was alive. And I did the first 2 volumes of the trilogy after he passed in 2016. The 3rd volume of the trilogy, Bill brought out, Diálogos brought out in 2012. So they're now bound together in this book, The Discovery of the New World. And you should know that these were published in French in 1972, 74, and 76 in Paris, where Fares was living. And he was born in 1940. What's interesting about that is it means he came of age. He was 21 when he, pretty much against his father's wishes, quits being a student in Paris and goes down to join the, with the idea of joining the fighting to liberate Algeria from the French. So when would that be? That would be essentially the year or a few months before, at the end of 61, the independence of Algeria, which was 62. So he comes of age right when the country is liberated, achieves its independence. The trilogy is all about that context of the Algerian War. The last novel in it is more the aftermath, the first couple of years after the war. The first two are really the adolescence of the protagonist, a number of other characters that repeat themselves. But it's coincidental with the end of that war. Thinking back a little to Fares's high school years, let's say, when Algeria, that would be the 50s, when Algeria was still not independent. Okay, so let me read before I do that. There's a kind of burlesque character in the first of the three novels. That novel's called The Orchard Grove. This character is called Siamese, with two characters, Siamese twins. Siamese 2 puts his gear back on, a bikini of capital size. Bikini, that's in caps. An undershirt matching the eyebrows, bushy, tousled. That was just a translating problem that Pierre Joris has talked about. And, it's not particularly indicative of all kinds of problems that I had doing the books. As I say, most of them I did with Fares, and he was very helpful and so on. But separately, in an interview that Pierre Joris discovered, he talked about this bikini. It's not something anyone would really understand. Why is the Siamese twin wearing a bikini? Why is it even in there? So here's what Fares himself said about it. Take, for example, what I write there in caps. I am a bikini. There it is, written in large letters. Why do you laugh? It's one of the most important things in the book. This word bikini that makes you laugh. Go further. The French call us biko or beak. That means us North Africans. Maybe that would be dirty Arabs. Pierre has said in his intro, by the way, his intro to this trilogy, maybe towel heads in American English, pretty close to the N word. In other words, Fares continues, I'm bikini, a French sentence. That is a beak, an Arab slang, pejorative for Arab, who says no. I refuse to be a beak. I refuse to be subjected to the racism of the language of the French. That's because ni is the verb nier, to deny or refuse. Ki is just the pronoun who. So I'm a bikini. I am a North African who refuses to be insulted. Okay. So Pierre continues in the introduction to this trilogy, untranslatable, of course, but also I submit untranslatable for the French reader, that in the original, right? Who I am sure will not be able to read the pun in this word any better than an English speaker. So it will be translated as bikini, be left as bikini, a funny, startling, but incomprehensible island in the language sea of Fares's narrative. So this is adventurous prose. It's at times poetry. It's fragmented. It's explosive. As Pierre has said elsewhere, interestingly, he said this in a preface to my translation of Fares's A Passenger from the West. That's a Diálogos book, roughly contemporary with this trilogy. It came out in 1971. A Passenger from the West, largely about James Baldwin. But Pierre Joris in that preface says that, Fares, when he writes a novel, is not mimetic in the Aristotle's sense. He's not it's not representative prose. And Pierre said most novels, let's face it, most novels that most people like to read are bourgeois, leisure, mimetic, narrative, I guess he said.
Right, yeah.
So Fares is not that, right? It's you don't know where you're going most of the time with it. Here we go. It's on page 31 of the first novel. All three sections are from the first novel, which is called The Olive Grove. Me, Brandy Fax. Brandy Fax is a protagonist, and it's a alter ego of Fares. When he mentions the ogress, I'm 4 lines down on page 31. The ogress is a figure in Berber folklore, and he had just done a dissertation in real life on the ogress. And in this book, he has just finished his dissertation, is on a train. Me, Brandy Fax, the presence of several characters from old tales. Yes, the ogress exists. Sweet land where man learns the fullness of gesture, of his place, of his displacement, where life is a law of presence, where the reaches, once they're surveyed, push fear away. Intimate, the fear of oneself, the fear of utter abandonment of self, fear of dereliction of the self, fear of being duped. And at the same time, joy of a world eluding itself with play of universal limbs. Yes, the ogress exists, and yet she lacks the reality of a wooden match, a cigarette, a bike, a Citroen, a barbecue, a tire chain, a highway, a caravel, a jar of mustard, a parking lot, a hairdresser, a supermarket, a pipeline, a steamboat, a tractor, a church, a cathedral, a Boeing, a presbytery, an Enox, an ocean liner, a cigarette lighter, a museum, a van full of cops, a moped, a Renault Dauphine, an airport, a microphone, a runway, a safari, a carbine, a Mauser, a bazooka, a tank, a blockhouse, a machine gun, mad genitals, mad bullets streaming toward mad bodies, bodies falling, hands burning, skin burning, faces burning. Napalm, Layachi shouted, napalm. The refugees will be here any minute. Those who yell and ask and speechify and pant and swear and insult and yell and who die. Why? Why? Yes, the ogress exists. This whole narrative, which is a narrative from adolescence in Algeria to moving to France, and Fares in his 20s, putatively, is chopped up and full of flashbacks and so on. It's explosive in a way, and there are images of explosions you just saw. And in fact, the French used napalm and dropping bombs on roadways and villages and so on was part of that war that Fares saw at a bit of a distance, but he saw it. So this is page 129. It's the beginning of chapter 11. There are always people who want to say to me that they don't understand me. No, they don't understand my words or the form of my language. It's their strange way of eluding the old teacher. I would like to have already lived for several centuries in order to be absolutely sure of being at the zenith of my understanding. I'm talking about centuries to come, and thus to leave in complete tranquility this world after having conversed one last time with the old teacher. Abd Noir, who can really tell me about this Abd Noir and his red hair? He disappeared in 1961 during the silent demonstration in Paris, a disappearance among disappearances. It seems my speech is incomprehensible, yet the work I'm doing is simple enough. I'm giving a burial place, yes, a burial place to this migration in this world. Of course, migration and exile are themes for Fares. Abd Noir is an alter ego that repeats through the trilogy character. And you made this footnote on this page, but many of you know the reference to a silent demonstration. It was the worst, one of the worst nights for Algerians living in Paris, where hundreds were killed by riot police during a peaceful demonstration against a curfew. This is in the last year of the war. Many of them thrown into the river Seine. So this is 2 pages that read sort of like poetry. It's 148. That which remains incomprehensible in you, not to others, but to you. So you force yourself to denounce the wound so that the word becomes plural and equal to that foretaste of world you're looking for and apprehend. A being whose sole enigma is to be a profusion of existence, a profusion of which you like to grasp not the guarantee, but the horizontality, or better, there where precisely an excess pulls away, the permission. Yes, tied in this way to what is permitted, to the act of a permission, whose movement you would contemplate. Thus, avid and close, you would speak in the natural ease of offering words, this happiness, which you were in being together, two in this foretaste of the world. There where the strange pleasure of the hedgehog or the thrush. You imagine the bar of a cafe on the Ramblas as imaginative as an olive grove, where you might imagine that other life you could have had. If, yes, the war that uncovers life, as incomprehensible as that moment, which, yes, sly poetics of fraud. And so you dwell like this at the bar of a tapas cafe on the Ramblas, within the love of one life you're living. This first novel of the trilogy ends in Barcelona. So there's lots to say about all that. I've said just a hint of the bikini business about translation. I'll leave it up to Bill to see where we go with this at this point. You get an idea of what Fares is all about.
Well, I think we can go most anywhere. Maybe we're at about an hour. How about if we open it up for questions or comments, or anybody out there want to say anything? And I'm gonna put it in gallery view. You can raise your hand or send something in chat.
I just want to congratulate Jake for doing Khaïr-Eddine. Fares is the guy who turned me on to him. And this was about 10 years ago. And I wasn't able to get the book, Agadir. The other books are marvelous too. And I'm glad there's more than one translation in the works. I wasn't able to get the book in Paris, and I got it in Agadir. Well, in a little bookstore. It might be the only one there. You know, Agadir is not a great place to visit because of what happened in the earthquake, frankly. But there were stacks of this book there, and it was cheap. And I was listening to stories about the earthquake as I bought it. Fantastic stories.
If I can say something something that I heard in all the 3 writers we heard, and something that to me is so core to Maghrebi writing. I I discovered in a way that this is one of those amazing cultures where you have very high level written culture for 2000 years, or however many, 1500, together with an oral culture. Two cultures that have been going on parallelly. We have lost most of the oral stuff, you know, trying to get a tiny bit back, a little popular stuff, but our culture is the written one. And the Maghrebi culture has those two elements, the written and the oral, as core, very living, alive elements. And I think in the various ways, the various texts we have heard, you can see that richness and that doubleness, the way that works itself into contemporary writing.
Yeah, I can't wait to read the Ferez. That line about the burial of the migration is going to be stuck in my head for the rest of the day, especially how much it relates to Agadir.
Yeah. Well, of course, a lot of the Ferez stuff is just trauma. You know, it's his dad was actually important in the government, and Ferez, you know, escaped most of the trauma of the fighting. But he was a high school student. You know, some of the massacres, the massacre in '45 by the French. These are things he witnessed as a child and as an adolescent, even though he was in Paris for the last few years of the war. So the character of a lot of the writing is the fractured nature of it is not just the kind of identity building and identity building in exile that you might expect and that you find with a lot of writers who live in Paris. On top of that, it's the kind of exploded, he's quite frank about this, exploded personality and I think this is probably why he became a psychotherapist towards the end of his life. The sense that his characters have exploded personalities that are traumatized and have a great deal of trouble coming together. And what he does with the prose, this is why Pierre Joris said this very well, the prose, I should have said this earlier, rather than being representative and mimetic, enacts something. What his fractured prose does, fragmented prose does, is enact the kind of trauma and difficult assembling of an exiled personality, an exiled self. You know, and so the prose is always adventurous in that way, but it's quite challenging when you can't make the syntax cohere sometimes. You know, so I kind of like to prepare people for that.
If I can make a pitch to the crowd there, there is an issue of the Yale French Studies just came out on North Africa, which, by the way, has a piece by Reda Ben-Smaya on Nabil Farez and a number of other people. And at the end, Habib Tangour and I have a long conversation about the Maghreb and what it means to be a Maghrebi writer at this point, as against that concept of the Francophone, you know, or with that. So we're talking about that. So that's that issue. Voila.
Pierre,
Yeah.
maybe you can translate. Fares has a sense of humor, very big sense of humor. And when he spoke about our writing of Maghrebian literature, especially Katib Yassin, he always said this writing is la malédiction de la colonisation, la malédiction.
The malediction, the bad speaking, the malediction, the bad diction or the malediction of the Maghreb. Yeah, nice, lovely.
Yeah, it's one of the more fascinating things about the field to me is the kind of problematic relationship that all of these writers have, justifiably so, with the French language. But of course, for the Maghreb, it's it doesn't seem to me that there's really like some sort of another language that they could go back to that would be, let's say, more genuine or more true to their heritage. It's like a culture that's been colonized so many times that it's sort of adrift. And so the language itself becomes a migration. Yeah.
Bill, all three countries have made Berber one of their national languages by now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Berber is back there because, as Kateb Yassin said, why should I write in Arabic? That was another colonial imposition on.
Exactly, yeah. Mm.
And as he also went on saying, I will write in French. We won the war. French are the spoils of war that we're keeping, you know. But so I think there's the multitude, I think there's a multiplicity of languages, and that's one of the great richnesses. Habib, don't you think that the richness, there's a richness there in terms of all that?
I think the three languages are in the same time in our head. And when you write, you have to translate all these languages in a new French language.
Exactly, yeah.
This is something Abdelkabir Khatibi makes fairly explicit. You know, one of his novels is called Love in Two Languages, but he's not excluding Berber either. So there are three languages, as you say. But remember that for the Algerians, there's this imposition by the present government, which, you know, putatively is the government of the liberators and the new Algeria that is supposed to be heroic and so on. It's very disappointing to people like Fares and Algerian writers who are, many of them exiled. And the imposition is a sort of a concept, a nationalistic concept that brings with it stuff that's sort of limiting for the artist. And the slogan is one people, one religion, one language. This is Algeria. It's a program, a national program. And that's something that, you know, Fares has talked, all Algerian writers talk about how, at least the ones that write in French, how crazy that is. Fares really respects Berber folklore and Berber traditions, and he comes from a very Berber part of Algeria, the Kabylia Peninsula. But the idea that Arabic is the one language is completely nuts, and Islam was imposed on Berber deities and Berber folklore just the way Arabic was imposed in North Africa.
Habib, you know something of all that. What is your sense now writing?
No, I think Arabic, it's not the same imposition as the French, because Arabic, it was the melting pot with Hilal, Banu Hilal. It was not the first invasion. The first invasion was only Islam. The Berber the language was always Berber till the 12th century. But when the Hilalian came in North Africa, they managed, there was, how you say, mixed.
Intermarriage, mixed culture coming.
All the Berber who had the same way of life, transhumance,
humans, nomadic,
became especially the Zenata, the Berber Zenata, they became Arabs because they take the Arab language, and the Berber were only in the mountains.
Right.
And when the Berber came in the city, they had to speak in Arabic. Arabic was the language of law, religion, but with the time, I think our Arabic, because Maghrebian Arabs, the Orient peoples say we don't speak real Arab, but they are wrong. I think they are wrong because our Arab is sometimes we have words, very old words, Arabic words, and our speaking is, well, there is not one of the Arab language from Hilalian tribe. And so this, when you say now the Amazigh language, Berber language, is, people, they work, they try to write prosa. Berber language where always we had oral poems.
Oral, yes.
Poetry, an oral poetry, very big poets like Simuhan, but now they write this language, and we have modern poetry, not oral poetry, but written poetry in Amazigh, and prosa also in Amazigh. And there are many festivals, poetry festivals, prizes of this literature in Algeria now.
Mm-hmm. So now we need some translators from Amazigh into English.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, we're approaching an hour and a half now, which I think is it's probably good. This has been really great. I want to thank, first of all, Peter and Pierre and Jake and Habib for putting this together for us. For me, it was really much my own curiosity and interest that created this little panel. And thanks to all of you who came and saw it. Go to lavenderinc.org or dialogosbooks.com, same website. Search for North Africa and you'll see the entire Diálogos North African collection. There was about a dozen books there, all of which are really stunning, and it's a field that once you get interested in it, will be very hard for you to leave. And also, check out the rest of the events coming up for the festival. Just in about an hour, we have a panel right here in the same place, which is in the likeness of authenticity, poetry, appropriation, and identity, with Tyrone Williams, T.C. Marshall, Gene Hooving, Alan Golding, and Gabriel Gooding. Actually, that's at 6 p.m. Central Time. To remember to calculate for your time zones, and come back and see us then in an hour and a half. And thanks again, and we'll see you there.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Maybe.
So, allez, bye. C'était un plaisir.